thinking about Europe and tobacco policy across the board, what's happening that's interesting? Where are the examples of maybe good practice and leading edge practice that you're seeing?
I think that's sort of a very interesting question given where we are. As you know, we're discussing at the moment the Tobacco Tax Directive, and there's sort of a lot of chatter around the fact that the Tobacco Products Directive will also be released this year, which I think is, on the one hand, it's really good, because it means there's sort of a recognition that the legislation as in its current form is not suiting, I would say, the environment any longer. And I think that the reason for that is because there is a handful of countries who are doing quite a good job. And the more that they sort of push the envelope, the more sort of, the Commission is sort of pressed to do something and to have a reaction. And so we see a lot of good things, I would say, happening I'm from Belgium, and sort of based in Belgium now, so I'm always a champion of Belgium and sort of the progressive measures that Belgium is taking in terms of its bans. We've got a display ban in convenience stores, so a lot of that idea is if you don't see products, people are sort of less likely to, especially the startup of people who are trying newer products. They've also got very important, I would say, bans around terrace use on smoke and aerosol-free products. The Netherlands as well is also a great champion in what they're doing in terms of their bans. There's a lot of, I would say, good activists in the Netherlands as well who are doing a great job in sort of creating, I would say, noise around what is happening in the Netherlands. You've also got the likes of Sweden, and so Sweden has done, and I think that the industry does a good job of using Sweden as a base on the fact that they have a sort of around 5% prevalence use of tobacco, and I have to sort of say that is as a result of really strong measures. That is not necessarily what the industry is trying for us to be aware of, and I think that's sort of very important to bring forward. You've also got the likes of France. They also are expanding sort of some of their bans. There's a lot of work happening in France. I think France is quite a difficult country for these types of measures, but I would say that France is also definitely moving ahead on certain bans. We work very closely with our partners in France, and so we're very sort of aware of how good they're pushing. But as a result of these big countries that are really championing, then you have a handful of countries who are kind of trying to pull down, the rest of Europe. I think today I read an article that the WHO says that the Euro region is going to be the worst, and it's not going to reach its targets of, I think it was 5% prevalence by 2040, which I think is not, we have to recognize that that's no longer going to be the case. We've got a lot of divide in Europe around this narrative of harm reduction. We see that playing out in discussions, and I think that will be a highly contentious conversation when we talk about the Products Directive. We see as well sort of industry-backed countries in the conversations around the Tobacco Tax Directive. And then when you start to get into conversations with people around illicit trade, around harm reduction, there's no real evidence base. It's something that, maybe the industry have said without actually backing up what their claims are. So it's really fascinating to see. And I think that's probably historical, like we say, it's a sort of cyclical thing, that every couple of years this kind of rolls around. You've got these countries who push these type of narratives without really any scientific base. So there are a lot of countries who are doing very well, and then there are a lot of countries who are not doing well, and that has a lot of pressure on sort of the harmonization of the system in Europe.
So safe spaces, smoke and aerosol-free environments is a fairly new concept here. What's the thinking in Europe on that?
So in 2024, the Commission sort of highlighted that regulation needs to be looked at and sort of, I would say, improved. And the basis of it was the expansion of products, so not only tobacco, smoke, but also aerosol-free products. And then as well expanding that from indoor places to certain outdoor places. So I think that was sort of the objective of this proposal. And so what we saw was it was highly contested in the parliament, where it was actually, there were a lot of sort of MEPs who were in favor of the proposal, but unfortunately in the discussions the proposal ended up being quite watered down, and in the end they didn't support it. So it was highly contested in the parliament. It allows member states to take up as much as they want, and you see it in several countries, like in Spain as well, where they're trying to expand that to hospitality areas, etc. So it's really up to member states to decide how far they're willing to go in terms of their regulation around safe.
And what were the persuasive arguments for the council in making that recommendation? Why did they feel that safe spaces was a good direction for the future?
I think that they based it particularly on, and if you look at where safe spaces have been implemented, a lot of that framing was around children and around sort of protecting the spaces for children. And so we see it, and I think that it's pretty well done in areas where there are schools and parks, etc. So I think that the framing was really around, one, how do we acknowledge that the environment of smoking is not only traditional smoke, but now we've got this aerosol and products that are causing vapor in the air. And so it was about, I think, recognizing that the products have expanded, and so perhaps that law is no longer valid. So acknowledging that expansion. And then really, I think if you talk about exposure, there's also sort of a subliminal message that the more you see something, the more likely you are to do it. And I think that is also something that you kind of recognize. If people are not seeing it and smelling it, and especially for the vapor, then the triggers to and cues to start or to do it is probably lowered. But I think really children, if you look at where these regulations have been enforced in certain countries, it's really around the spaces where children are really sort of would be impacted.
So it's a focus on the generation growing up, and the fact that seeing these things normalizes them and makes it more likely that.
And I think that's exactly it. And I think as well it sort of fit in with the Europe's Beating Cancer plan as well. So it's with this ambition of a tobacco-free generation, right? Yeah. And in your goals to get to a tobacco-free generation, you have to then, your target is the youth actually. And so you're trying to, at a certain moment, have that one generation doesn't get, there's no selling of these products. And so I think that was also sort of part of the reasoning for the council needing to sort of update those, is if you talk about your ambition around the Europe's Beating Cancer plan and sort of the several goals that you have in tobacco-free generation, you would need to acknowledge that the environment and the spaces that these products are being used need to be regulated.
So, as with Europe, there are some different views in the UK about e-cigarettes and so forth. But what I'm seeing in Scotland is that a new generation of children have been drawn into using nicotine products and are more at risk of using tobacco products because of e-cigarettes, vapes, but are now also using nicotine pouches. And is that something that you're seeing at European level?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that one important point is that we do see e-cigarettes being sort of the gateway for young children and youth to try to use sort of tobacco products. So let's say the traditional tobacco products. So that's one thing. We are seeing nicotine pouches. Several countries that have taken the measure to ban nicotine pouches, but the use and prevalence of nicotine pouches is rising in the EU. We see e-cigarettes as well, and I think that's a concern. Not only even in Europe, I think that I'm aware now that nicotine pouches have just hit the shores of Latin America. So the ability for these products to sort of infiltrate and how quickly they're spreading as well. And we can thank social media a little bit to how quickly things and information get spread these days. So it's not a unique problem to Scotland, it's definitely a problem all over.
Yeah, and I think yesterday in our Learning Day you very kindly came and presented on Smoke and Aerosol-Free Environments and what's happening in Europe, and that was tremendously valuable. Were there any parts of the Learning Day, the discussion, that you felt particularly fitted in with what you're seeing or that you found interesting?
Well, I think first of all, like the Learning Day in itself, it's as the title is saying, Learning Day, and it was definitely sort of a learning for me. I'm not following and 100% aware of what is happening in Scotland. I think that there's some interesting things in around data. So you heard a little bit of people sort of mentioning, oh, we actually have this data and things, because a lot of these arguments we need to base it, unfortunately, on scientific evidence. The industry doesn't really follow that metric necessarily, and we need that. And so one, it's refreshing to know that there is data. You just have to ask and be aware. And I think that's the opportunity of these types of learning days, right? Is that exchange of, actually, we have this data, you need it, and you could probably produce it into something that is effective and policy driven. So I think that is something that's awareness for me. The second as well is I found it quite interesting about secondhand smoking in sort of homes, which is something that we don't actually really discuss. I've not really interacted with that topic, which is a fascinating topic as well, in terms of, and I think that also plays a very, comfortably in talking about smoke and aerosol-free environments, because a home is also an environment, right? And so those types of learning, even just the exchanges sort of in smaller groups of working in workshops, is also just fascinating to hear the different perspectives from people who are working in government or who are working with children on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think it was a great day, and delighted to welcome you to it and to Scotland. From all the many conversations I know you've had over the course of yesterday and around that, have you any advice or thoughts for us in working in Scotland and for Ash Scotland?
I think probably continue to do that. I think that the ability, what you provide is an opportunity for people from different sort of spheres who are working on the same topic but from different perspectives, and by having those types of learning days, you create and facilitate the opportunity for knowledge exchange and for, I would say, networking across. So people are able to meet each other who wouldn't necessarily or normally meet with each other. I think that Scotland has, and I think it's now the 20th anniversary of sort of very progressive legislation that happened in Scotland. I would say, continue to push on that. I think as well to recognize, the threat of e-cigarettes and the youth, the uptake of youth, and not only e-cigarettes. I would also say sort of that expands to these nicotine pouches, which I'm not really sure what the prevalence is here, but the acknowledgement that is also something on the radar or on the table. And I think continue to, I think it was so prevalent for me yesterday how important the Ash Scotland force is in this community, just by the people who showed up at the Learning Day. And I think that that's something that is invaluable in terms of and in bringing everybody together. I think that role that you play is unique and should continue, absolutely.
Well, here's hoping. Thank you for your time, thank you for joining us, and thank you for sharing your expertise and your perspective. It's been tremendously valuable.
Well, thank you for having me.